Alrighty, I think we're good to go. I got everything. Trying to remember if I got through everything on my checklist, which has mysteriously disappeared from my desk. I got various things all set up. For some reason, my tablet seems to have gone dead overnight. I'm not entirely sure what that's about. Thanks, Samsung. So we're struggling along at 1% battery plugged in there. We'll see how well that works. Also, we'll see if my upstairs neighbor decides she wants to continue her bowling frenzy, which has been something that's been going on for not so quite a bit of a time here. Let's go ahead and click some stuff here, shall we? Something like that, say. There we go. So we did not have a stream last week. Life intrudes, but here we are. And ooh, the fan in that PC is very unhappy. I don't know why, but hopefully it'll get better because actually have let me actually see it in the stream here. But back in the closet, I have a replacement monitor that's like twice the size of the ones that are currently on my desk, plus a new system and some other components. I've been trying to find time to slot into the desk, but that's sort of a fraught type of operation because I got two work computers here, this work computer, my MacBook, the other laptop there. Everything's all connected together. It's a little bit of a pain. Anyway, hopefully that would stop that horrible squealy sound from happening. So we are here tonight to do some Sublime Text plugin development, and I don't really have too much of a plan because it's been a really crazy few days here for the last week or so. So I have a couple of ideas for things where we might go. One of those is looking into the piano plugin that you may have seen us working on for the last couple of streams. There have been some changes and things made to that. And one of the person that started on the thing and came up with the idea, Keith Hall, my good friend Keith, you might know him as the Syntax King if you're hanging out in the Sublime Text community. Um, he encountered a bug that wasn't triggering for me, but it did trigger for him, and we want to check into that a little bit and see. And apart from that, and there was a question on Stack Overflow where someone had a question about something they'd like to do with a project. Seemed like it might be a fun thing to play with. I don't really have much plans, so we should probably just go ahead and jump on into this bad boy, don't you say? So let's see if I remember how to do it. And of course, that turned itself on, even though I specifically turned it off before this. There's something very specific about that button that makes that happen. Grr. In any case, if you have video suggestions, please do tweet them to me at OdatNurd, including suggestions for live streams such as this one, which are scheduled out for the next couple of weeks at least. Unfortunately, this is the one that should have happened last week because things happened, and it was one of those things where if there was a stream, it would either start late and go very short or start on time and go very short. So either way, it didn't seem like a particularly good idea to do a stream. We want to have like a long run-on time to actually get something done. So we are here here we are in Sublime Text. Where's my mouse? There we go. And one of the first thing we're going to look at here is the piano plugin. Now, the last thing that I did in this a few days ago was to refactor some of the display code for the actual piano that we can see up there in the top part of the window here. Because that's actually just an ASCII file that has syntax highlighting applied to it, courtesy of Keith Hall, the Syntax King. And when a note is played, either by the mouse, that's probably a little too quiet to hear the way things are currently configured. Hang on, I think I may have fiddled with my gain setting in QSynth. Hang on, let's set this back to 100 and see what happens. Right, so when a note is pressed as such with the mouse or when you use the keys, what it's actually doing is using the Sublime Text Region API to find all of the region that encompasses a particular key and apply a color highlight to it. And every time a note goes on, it needs to calculate that region and add it over a series of region calls, because this isn't a contiguous region. There's one, two, three, four, five, six, 7 total lines that make up this key. And remember, regions are a span from one character to the next in the buffer. So each one of these longer white keys takes 7, and these ones take probably 3 or 4 different regions in order to apply the color to the character that's inside. And whenever a note goes off, then that region needs to be removed. That one's a little bit easier because each one of these regions has a name that's based on the note and the octave that's being played. So it's very easy to know which one to turn off by just saying erase the region that is octave 3, note 1, and then this key goes out. But what we would find with that is that surprisingly, Sublime isn't really set up for pulsing regions at that velocity, even with hardware set up at a really fast clip. And when you're playing something like for release, or I don't have it in there. I think I'd have to hit a key here to do it. There can be quite a bit of keyboard traffic going, and as a result of that, uh, it would slow the song down because every time a MIDI note is played, it has to update the keyboard. So if it takes a while for the note to actually light up or not light up, then it has to wait before it can play the next note, and the whole song slows down. So what we did was make a modification to that. So there's a new class called the display driver that knows inherently about every key on the keyboard and whether it is. Let's turn that fan off. That might be screwing up the audio a little bit. Although it's a little warm in here. So we'll see what happens. Maybe that's why that computer was so unhappy down there. Or because for some reason when the stream starts up, the CPU spikes to 50% before it drops back down. Anyway, as I was saying, the display driver class keeps a track of exactly which keys are lit up and which keys are not. And whereas in the previous iteration of this, whenever a note was played, it would immediately update the view to add the specific region that was required. What we do now is queue up a request to say we want to play note 3 in octave 2, and we want to play note 5 in octave 3, or the note 6 in octave 2 is going off now, and those are just sort of queued up in a list of updates that should happen. And then at set intervals, all of the updates apply all at once. So any new regions are added, any old regions are removed, and that ends us up with something that works a lot better for various things. And so I have a key binding set up for this one. This is for when we have a bug and we're trying to see if we can solve what the problem actually is. But the display is very much more performant now than it was before. Kind of to the detriment of the whole thing, realistically, because if there's a lot of really fast notes playing, the way this is set up, if a note comes on and then goes off before the keyboard gets updated, or if it goes on and then off and then on again and then off again, it's the state that is in place at the end of the wait period before the update happens that determines whether it's lit up or not. So if there's a lot of frenetic note action going on, then it can appear that the keys aren't necessarily, you don't get to know that this key was like tapped 5 times. You just know that that key was on. And I guess an example of that might be something like, well, this one's probably less egregious. Let's see. Oh, I always say plat instead of play, man. I should add a new item to the list for this thing. And part of this little demonstration here is to try to trigger the issue that Keith saw, because I played with this quite a bit and was unable to run into it. But this is for release. That looks like it might require a little of this. We don't need to blow anybody's ears out, I'm sure. But this gets to a part where there's a lot more keyboard action, and that was the part where you could visibly see the keyboard struggling to keep up, and you could audibly hear it struggling to keep up with actually playing the song back at the appropriate rate. And that works a lot better now. And yeah, if the idea of this is sort of to be a play along and something to teach you how to play. There's sort of going to be a waterfall of notes that happens under here that shows over time which notes to play or were played, which is a thing unto itself. So knowing that this key was tapped 4 times, this is an example of that various thing happening there, right? And there's this particular passage, it used to not be able to play at speed at all. I tested this actually with, whoops, I guess I should give the right thing to focus. Toto's Africa as a MIDI, which I think is actually this key. But maybe I just triggered something happening. Hard to say. I might have forgotten which key does what because I had various things going on. Let's see. Anything? Anything? Oh, look, it's totally doing that thing that I wasn't sure. Huh, that's interesting. This is a very intermittent thing, and we can't. Wait, guess what is really out of sync? This really seems like it's an issue with Mido, the library that we're using, and not necessarily with the code, but it's really hard to say for sure. But yeah. Now, I think if I stop that, we might even hear something. I'm going to go ahead and click reset over here. But in any case, this is the stuff that we have been working on. So there's a little couple of bugs to work out in here, and of course some more features to add. But the particular issue that Keith was seeing would be in the display driver. Maybe we want to. Yeah, I didn't think so. Let's go ahead and zoop that over with the mouse. I've messed up my key bindings for origami for changing the column. So this is the class that is doing the business. Get the region for a particular note. This is the magic of looking for the area of the buffer that encompasses a note so that it can apply a region. And here we just add the regions for that particular thing or turn it off with erase. Render is the magic that's doing this. Now what actually happens here is you need to call the note method on this class. Is that thing like always on top or something? There we go. Let's do that so I can see what's happening in that window. This is the entry point into the whole driver. You give it an octave, you give it a note index, which is something like 0 through 11 for which note in there, because the standard Western music has 12 semitones in an octave, C through B, and sometimes there's a flat and sometimes there's a not. So B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. And there's a full step between all of the notes except B to C and E to F. There's a half step for those ones. That's why there's not a black key in that segment of the keyboard. So there's 11 total notes there. Of course, that's different in music in other parts of the world. Like I think Eastern music uses, it might use oh man, it's been so long since I studied music theory. Like there might be more tones, they might be more even tempered. Don't quote me on that. It's I'm a guitar player, so I know enough music theory to be dangerous. But in any case, this schedules an update request for whether or not the note should be turned on or off, and it's queued into a dictionary that uses a tuple based on the octave and the note index to record whether the key state for that should be turned on or off. And if we haven't already queued an update, we set one and use set timeout to trigger so that that happens in Sublime's main thread. Because we want to interact with Sublime all from one thread, and the easiest way to hop out of whatever thread we might be in, which might be the main thread and might not be the main thread, is to use set timeout. That causes the callback to be queued up for execution by a loop that runs inside of Sublime's main thread. The actual call itself is this one up here. Now, the idea behind this is there is a set frequency at which this will update. So there's a setting for it. Let's close that. We don't need that. Which specifies how many updates per second. So you'd set it to say 30 frames per second, and then it knows exactly how many milliseconds between when the request to update happens and when the update actually occurs. And anything that happens within that time period, once one thing is asked to be turned on or turned off, still gets updated into this dictionary, but it doesn't schedule another timeout. So once 30 milliseconds or 33.333 milliseconds or whatever the frame rate is set to, we can set that anywhere from 1 update per second to 1,000 updates per second. So you can have it only flash keys once a second or 1,000 times a second if you wanted to, depending on the power of your computer, realistically. All of those updates get queued, but only one of them will cause an update, and this is how it gets the speed necessary to update multiple keys or turn multiple keys off. Now, this render call here actually iterates over the list of things that are asking to be updated, and it is basically looking up the key state to see what state that key is in. Everything defaults to being off as it is visually on the screen right now. And then if we're supposed to turn it on, then we draw the key, otherwise we erase it, and then we update the state. And it only happens if the new state for this key is different from what it was, which means if the update started with the key off and then we tapped to turn the note on, but we also turned it off within that 30 milliseconds, then it doesn't get drawn at all. That update, just that particular part of that update, I should say, not the whole update, but that one key remains as is. We don't do any work to try to find a region, because what's the point? We're just going to add it so that it can be off again, which is where we're getting a lot of time savings here. Now, the issue that Keith was seeing with this is that this update request dictionary is updated here in the call to note. And then we use set timeout to jump to Sublime's main thread. So this is running in the main thread where it's actually updating things. But specifically, it was calling, self.update request items to iterate over this. And while it's iterating this in the main thread, some other thread is calling this, and then it's trying to update this dictionary. And Python, no likey that particular bit of business. I'm going to say we want to reset the output port for that, and we will also reset this to see if that solves the weird problem we were seeing. Because I saw it when I first implemented this, and then I didn't see it for a long time, and now it's just come back because, live stream. That's just, going to be a but. No, it's still being weird about it. Updates are getting ahead of the playback in a way that I don't quite understand. Yeah, I'm aware. Okay, so let's quit that and fire it back up again. Whoa, went to the wrong window. Hello! Welcome to the stream. We are wondering why this piano is being a butt. Even that's not fixing it, huh? That is weird. I wonder if, this is the sort of thing that makes me think that this is more an issue with QSynth than anything else. So let me quit QSynth here and restart it. That could be the reason why that is being a jerk. And let's go ahead and do this, because we don't need to be bothered by that. And let's see. I think I need to reset the output port again to make sure that links up. Yeah, that works better. Oop, this turn that down a little bit again. Yes, indeed, I do use a mechanical keyboard. The Philco Magis Type 2 has cherry browns in it, if I remember correctly. They make a very satisfying click. So I really enjoy it. I actually intended to buy. They have the same manufacturer has the exact same keyboard layout, but in a Ninja layout. So all of the key caps are completely black. And I was sorely tempted to get that because what better way to stop people from using your computer than to have a keyboard on it where they can't see what any of the keys are. Um, but unfortunately, the store didn't have any that day, so I was forced to get this one. After only a small bit of Googling, actually, because there was a little bit of a coffee cup accident on my other keyboard in the middle of a workday, and I had to run over to the local computer store. So I did some Googling to see who thought what was cool as far as mechanical keyboards go. My old one used to be a Corsair C60, I think. That was a mechanical keyboard too. I think those had cherry red keycaps. It's a gamer keyboard, uh, and its distinguishing feature is all of the key posts stick up out of the keyboard, and it was flat, so you could clean errant beard hairs out of it really easily. This one's a little bit more of a pain in that regard, but I have enjoyed it nonetheless for all of the action. I've had it for quite a few years now, I think, and I haven't managed to drop coffee on it even one time, so that was cool. The interesting thing there was it was a coffee cup, much like this one, and it slipped out of my hand and wanged on the edge of the keyboard by where the Windows key is. So I didn't actually spill coffee on it, but whatever I did stop the keys from that area of the keyboard from doing anything ever again. Now I think what we have learned here is that whatever that weird problem is, it was QSynth's problem and not mine, because restarting Sublime didn't fix it, but restarting QSynth did. I have a non-mechanical Logitech K70 keyboard. Oh yes, I have. I'm not sure what that one is back there on the table. I have a laptop over to my left here, and a MacBook over to my right. But this is my main work computer, and this is a Linux computer that I'm using right here. So I have another keyboard that's wireless that I can bring on when I want to do something on that one without using the laptop keyboard, and it's a Logitech uh, something. I can't remember exactly which one off the top of my head. It's actually not too bad. The only thing I don't like about it is it doesn't have a dedicated context menu key, which I am really, dependent on for a lot of stuff. Like whenever I have a terrible spelling mistake, I can easily pop up the menu without having to reach for the mouse. Fortunately, the new build of Sublime allows you to bind keys to modifiers. And which actually, I thought I had actually set that up. Maybe that wasn't on this machine. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. This is something that I run on my other computer. So because that keyboard doesn't have the dedicated key for the menu, we can bind a key to be able to pop that up. I use this with startling regularity. And then I get unhappy that other software doesn't support it. So the real question is, why is this breaking? Oh, was it the key binding that's so cool? I assume that's more cool than the fact that my keyboard doesn't have a key that I'm used to pressing. I run into that actually a fair bit because I'm so used to being able to select a whole word with Control D or wrap it in quotes that when I'm doing stuff like in a web browser or chats and stuff, I'm constantly screwing stuff up with wishing that I could do that. Would that the whole world had Sublime key bindings in it. I think we could, in theory, replicate what Keith was seeing. Whoops, that was not cool. With something like this. I think that breaks it. Yeah. So we probably don't want something like that unless we guard this thing. Hmm. This is tricky business. Now, the serious way to do this would be to create a mutex on the dictionary to stop anything from modifying it. But that kind of mutexes are the sort of thing that are perhaps not as great for people as that want to have high-speed action. Wow, that is bright, man. I guess based on the fact that there's a locked dict package, there's probably not just a thread safe dictionary. A lock here will add almost no overhead. Ah, well, all right. Well, maybe that's what we want because of the global interpreter lock. Right. Well, maybe we should give that a jingle then, huh? Wonder if I remember how to do that. What was something I did that required threading? Whoops. Did I do anything like that in override audit? Probably not. Oh, in here? No, that's just a spinner. No, or thus. All right, well, I guess that's something. I need a lock, so I need to import threading. So let's see. We already have that, right? I would imagine we do because we have a thread. Yeah. All right, so how we doing here, little battery? The juice coming out of this laptop's USB port is exactly enough to keep this running, so I don't think it'll actually charge while it's plugged in there, but at least it won't turn itself off. Let's say that the instance of the driver should have a lock. So we might say here, lock the update dictionary so it can't be accessed while, yeah, okay. Here we go. Move that over. And update is in progress. And that would have been nicer. So self.lock equals threading dot lock. Thus, right? And then we do try lock. Nope. Oh, just dot lock with blah dot lock with self dot lock dot lock. Oh, okay. Maybe we better call this update lock then, just to make that a little bit nicer. And weird. Okay, so the two things that need to do this are this with self dot update lock dot lock. Yipes. Set that up. Whoops. Don't do that, numlock. That's no one's friend. And we want that here. Oh, I guess we'll probably just go ahead and copy that. That reminds me. That still works, right? This was added this morning. Is this handy for anything other than if you happen to be using vintage or Vim key bindings that know to jump back 1 or 2 lines? I was also curious what happens if there's more than one selection. It just does nothing. That's probably the smartest way to do that. Okay. So I think that should be safe for the thing that we just tried. So if I did it again, uh-oh. Okay, well, clearly I missed something there. Da, da, da. Are you sure? It doesn't have a line 679. Wow, that is really disconcerting. I'm willing to try anything. That's how I ended up with the glow on my function calls. Let's see. Spinner key dot lock equals. Oh, right. Okay, that's just me being a dope. Where's the other one? There. We just need a little bit of that action. Okay, let's try that again. Deadlock. That can't be good for anybody. Okay, so the lesson of the hour is don't do that. Let's see. Well, it's just going to go ahead and... Whoops. That is not what that's supposed to do, bro. Stop it. Panic. There we go. The panic button. That's the thing we want. Okay, so that entirely unsafe. So let's not do that, shall we? Although I'm not sure why that would be the case. I guess it's not a recursive lock. That's interesting. If that locked up, then it means that something that called note was called from the same thread as render was running in, or render was called from the same thread that note was called in, and while it was trying to do an update, it decided to render and it hung. That is funky business. I guess what we could do is that doesn't necessarily need to have all of this in here. That reloaded, right? Yeah. That should be fine because this isn't updating the list at all. This is. Let's bring that. No, that's still an update to the thing. This locks it, has to take the lock while it's adding the note to be played or turned off. And this needs to lock it while it's iterating it and then later clearing it. Hey, look, this line is 666. Okay, I don't think I can deal with that. I'm going to have to bomb that out. I'll try anything, but I need to know my line numbers. Now, this takes the lock in order to iterate over all the things call draw key. Oh, this doesn't actually calling note or something silly, is it? No. I mean, I'm surprised that it's doing that, but at some level, it is multi-threaded code. Ooh, that's even worse. That hung it real good. Okay, don't do that. Okay. Clearly, that is not the way to go for something like this. I actually made it worse by moving that code out. That's weird. My thought here is, what if this used that to grab a copy of that thing and then clear it? The real weirdness of this is that, oh, I guess if note is called from something in the main thread while the render thread is rendering in the main thread, that's when it all goes crazy because it's trying to take the lock. This would be, oh, did I forget to, let's clean that up too. Excuse me. Of all the things I remember to do, that was not one of them. Ba-ba. So, our lock, a reentrant lock. Okay. Da-da. I guess the real weirdness there is if this is if this is one thread calling both, if the main thread is rendering while note is being called, then having a lock doesn't necessarily fix the problem, does it? Or the call to note is happening, huh? Try to chase the logic here. The call to note happens in the main thread, presumably, and render definitely happens in the main thread because we're calling set timeout. Oh, actually, set timeout async is running that in a different thread. So all of those assumptions I just mentioned are probably wrong. Definitely render is running in not the thread that's this thread. Still, I'm surprised that that ends in a lock because you would think that the render method will keep the list locked until everything is done updating, and then the note method would be able to obtain the lock. Well, let's see if that has any effect on anything. If it can get all the way through. But of course, for me, it could get all the way through previously, so I don't know that that necessarily solves any problem. I also don't think we necessarily want the render to happen in the async thread because that could cause it to lag behind what's actually being played. I think it's important to keep the playback in lockstep with the display because anything that's a asynchronous request, like async threads that are, or not async threads, async events like on load async and on post save async and such are all contending for that thread. So if there's other actions happening, that could block this. The good thing is this doesn't seem to take a lot of extra CPU. It's still keeping up. We'll know in a second. I am indeed using Sublime Text version 4, or Sublime Text, I guess we should say, because when the next version is officially announced, it's not going to have a version number. They're just going to call it Sublime Text with no version number. This particular plugin requires that version of Sublime, but only because we were too lazy to compile the MIDI libraries necessary for doing this in the version of Python that Sublime Text 3 uses. That still seems to be keeping up quite nicely. I guess as a to-do item, it doesn't keep track of the state even if it doesn't have the focus. That's probably something to note. This might fix Keith's problem, or it might actually do nothing because I wasn't experiencing it anyway, and if it was doing something, I guess it's the only one way to find out is to actually try it. Unfortunately, his computer's a little screwball. Huh. I think that's probably, I think we should probably keep that. Maybe when it gets the focus, it should do a reset. Let's add a note to that effect. Piano. Let's see. The only event we have here is on post text command, right? So let's say should we respond to on activated by doing a reset of the keyboard display? Oops. Maybe on deactivated instead. Yeah, it's probably not too shabby. All right, well that seems to be like okay. That playback did not slow down as much as I was feared that it might. At work, we do a lot of heavy threading in a server environment. So we have like a lot of machines with like 32 logical cores and processes that have 30 threads that are all vying. So we're very careful about where we throw a mutex because it can really slow stuff down. Try to architect things as much as possible to need to take a mutex as infrequently as possible because it really screws up with the scheduler. But perhaps that's not as much of an issue in a low scale, and probably not also in Python where the global interpreter lock sort of is already doing something like this for us anyway. So I think that's probably a thing, but the thought occurs that I probably should have did this prior to this because Keith has added in some stuff. So let's stash that. And what happened in master since? Let's see. Configuration for key binding keys as to which piano. Oh, that's neat. So those are actually a key instead of being hard coded. So that's nice. Sublime. Oh, doing some stuff in the old syntax. Okay, well that's more or less above my pay grade. I'm not entirely sure what he was doing in there. Oh, he did mention that there was some extra functionality that he added. I should fiddle with that. What was the thing here? And add label. Oh, to the symbol list. Oh, okay. Let's. I don't have anything like that open, do I? No, I don't. Let's see. We want. Let's say you. Oh wait, that's not a note. Those are notes. Neat. I never actually played with that before. It even tells you how much time has elapsed in the song up to that point. What was this actually doing though? Label definitions to the symbol list. I guess we might need to text, piano tune, entity name, label. Are there any of those in here? No. Ooh, hey, that doesn't work at all. Neat. Might have found a bug. We'll worry about that in a minute. Whoops, that's 2, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. I guess it probably would have been better to just sort of look into the syntax and see what it was that he did there that adds labels. But we'll pull this down, I think, into our version of this. Anything change? Oh, hey, this file changed. Wonder what that does. Hmm. Ooh, that's unhappy. The above exception was the direct cause of this one. Maybe we'll quit and restart because maybe there was some specific plugin action that did not get pulled in as a result of that. I do not personally use any language server plugins. No, I do everything sort of in Sublime, if you will. I'm one of those old-timey people that remembers when computer speeds were measured in megahertz and not in gigahertz, and as a result, I'm not really in the. I never really got into the whole autocomplete that tells you everything there is to know about everything. Although I did use IntelliJ for a while when I was working in Java, that's one of those things where I think that having an IDE is absolutely required for Java because there's so much going on, and it's got such a massive library that you really have no hope of keeping it all in your head. But I don't tend to do stuff like that for the most part, so I don't really use anything like that. Just the stuff that Sublime will pop on its own, which is actually sort of enhanced somewhat in the latest builds. Although that's probably not a good example of that. It's got more things in this version, and more even than this is displaying, I think, because I don't use the LSP, the language server package. Uh, a lot of the stuff that's been going on for the last little while uh, is additions to the Sublime API and stuff. And the last couple of builds, 3 builds, if I remember back correctly, have been including features added to the autocomplete system in Sublime to help make it work better with the official LSP plugins. John, the primary author of Sublime, and the other Sublime developers hang out in the Discord, and there's a channel in the Discord for the LSP. So they do a lot of back and forth in what Sublime needs to be able to do, or hopefully could do something like this to make LSP be able to provide completions in a better way. And they've been working hard to try and make the autocomplete system in Sublime have those kinds of features to make that easier. Because they're really, I think, looking towards LSP as the de facto way to get this sort of action, because I don't think they're going to build it into the core. There's just too much to track and support in that manner. But if they can provide the building blocks for the LSP package, then we're like 90% of the way there. Let's go ahead and works now. That's good. Okay, so the thing that was added there was the ability to jump to certain parts of the file. Oh, I see what he did. So when it gets to the @ signature, it's going to jump up to this bit and play that, I think, is the plan here. Probably should have paid more attention while that was doing that. This is something that he implemented after my last round of changes that I haven't had a chance to play with. Whoops. Nice. So you can see it stops down here at that and jumps up there and then goes back when it sees the dash dash dash, I guess. Nice. Stop tune. All right, so that's cool. Now there was something there also mentioned. Oh, actually, before we do anything, let's apply. Well, actually, we probably should have popped that, shouldn't we? Oh well. Um, let's just say add a mutex to the display driver to fix the iteration issue where the update method gets called during a render. We now lock the dictionary while working with it. I can't reproduce the issue on my system, but this seems like it's probably the safest bet anyway. And we can go ahead and let's see, let's go ahead and check out this. We added the lock. We bumped all of that code over with an extra if and added a to-do. So let's go ahead and stage that and commit it and go ahead and drop that stash because that was dumb. Okay, so for recording to work, there must be exactly 2 layout groups open in the window. One of those active tabs should be the piano, and one should be the piano tune whose first line starts with / recording or, okay. All notes played will be output to the piano tune view. Note that doesn't support simultaneous notes yet and probably can't due to where, okay. If the comment continues, so, that's just a bug fix for that. So let us check out this. And we'll go ahead and quit and restart just to make sure everything is cool. If Sublime crashes, is there a place to see logs and why it crashed? Not that I'm aware of, no. If you're on macOS, then I think it drops dump files that you could provide to the developers and they could trace it. And it might also do that on Windows. I've never actually experienced a crash personally on either of those systems. I On Linux, like I'm using here, normally if an application crashes, it would drop a core file, but I don't have my system set up to do that, so I'm not sure if it would do that offhand. But I think Mac OS and Windows have if they are tracking errors and they get the dump file, I think they sort of have a little log that they generate. From my recollection from going through issues on the issue tracker for Sublime, it mostly seems to be Mac OS that does that. In my experience, you really need to be the developer to actually diagnose a lot of stuff that happens in there, though. But yeah, that's about the only place that I know to do that. It used to be um, that if you started Sublime from a terminal with this and used --debug, that it would display to the console where you started it everything that was going to the console in here so that you could see messages happening. But in the more recent builds, that's no longer the case because we have the ability to pipe standard in and there's a different communication that's happening there. The beach ball of death on Mac. Yeah, I've been there. I don't know necessarily what Sublime per se. Everything seems to do that. My MacBook is a 2012 MacBook Pro running Mojave, so I'm kind of surprised it works as well as it does. To be perfectly honest, I think it's reached the limit of the point where I could update the version of macOS that's running on it, and the hardware will be able to keep up. Although I think it offered to update Catalina, or to Catalina, I should say. In which case, as long as Apple is aware of the spec of the computer and they think it's possible, maybe it might actually work. It's hard to say. Whatever came before Mojave didn't work as good as Mojave does, so there's that. I sort of held off for a while because of that. So, what do I have? Oh, right. Close that window. Let's create this and do that, and then say show p. Oh, right. Okay, yeah. Let's not do that then, shall we? Let's rip that tab out. Put it over there temporarily, and then bring it back over here. Right. I carefully wrote this thing to ensure that there was only ever one view, no matter how many windows you were in. Okay. Scratch buffer. Piano tune. Now let's see. What did he say here? There must be exactly 2 layout groups. One of the active tabs should be the piano, and one should be a piano tune whose first line starts with recording or recording with octave. So let's say we do that. Then all notes played will be output to the piano tune view. So if I copied everything correctly and did that, then if I play stuff in here, it should appear down there, I guess. Well, that seems to work. Although it does say recording with octaves, and it's not actually recording octaves in there. If the comment contains with octaves, notes from adjacent octaves will be marked in the piano tune file with the usual. Oh, I see. That's it bumping. And if the octave is further away. Or play a MIDI file currently untested and probably has abysmal performance. Let's give that a try, shall we? I'm going to remove all of that stuff out just to show that does seem to not make it unhappy. Let's play the Jeopardy theme and see what happens. Huh. Although I guess he did mention that it doesn't record note durations or timings. Well, remember he said that performance would be abysmal? He was not incorrect. Huh. All right, so this is an issue where simultaneous notes is definitely something that is necessary for this to make any sense whatsoever. But it worked, so it's got that going on. I'll report back to him that actually worked. So let's see. Yeah, that one doesn't have octaves, so it's just notes, right? So it's all inside one octave. That's still pretty handy for what it is, though, I gotta say. That is not too shabby. Yeah, the idea is you can quickly or help convert from MIDI to piano tune format. Nor does it record the notes lengths at the moment. Yeah, that's still not too shabby. Let's go ahead and close that. And we can come back up here and show piano in that window and get it back. Oh, whoops. Like so. All right, well, I think we should probably, I'm going to go back to master, I suppose, and delete the local branch, right? Yeah, maybe I should do that from here just to be sure. Whoops, that's not what I meant to do. Incidentally, when I mentioned earlier that I tend to use the keyboard for most things and the mouse for some things, but not a lot. But in live streams, I use the mouse more. It just is more visual. I talk with my hands and use it to point at things. But when it comes to using Git in Sublime Merge, I always use the mouse and specifically try not to use the keyboard where possible, except for typing messages. Due to that whole having a real good sense of exactly what it is that I'm doing at any given point. So when I have a change, there are key bindings for being able to say stage this, skip to the next hunk, stage that. I always go carefully through and stage hunk by hunk or file by file after verifying everything. And even then, I jump back to the summary and check it one more time, usually before I commit things, to make sure something terrible hasn't happened. I'm going to delete this. So it's still origin, but I don't want to have a local version of it because he's going to keep working on it and he might merge it and then I'll have a dangling local branch. But I'm going to switch. I'm switched back to master, so we should probably quit out of there and fire it back up. How are we doing on time here? It's only about an hour, huh? All right, well, I don't know that we necessarily solved the particular problem. I mean, it's a solution. It probably should have been using a mutex all along, but when I traced through it, it really seemed like everything was always happening in the one thread anyhow. Um, I'm going to go ahead and push that up, just that it's free and clear. Um, but I think that's the only thing that I had on track for this specifically. Let's see. If I look here, check this. Masking a function requiring a full. Oh, okay. Layout files are using Unix line endings, but I'm using load resource and append to get them into the buffer. So on other platforms, it's probably going to get all angry and show line feeds and or carriage returns inline. Okay, let's test that theory because I'm pretty sure that is something that's going to make everyone everywhere unhappy. And that's a little something that we can actually work on right here. So we need to, whoops, piano layout. Oh, wow, there's like a bunch of these things. Did we change the name of these? Oop, go away, you. Piano 5. Oh, wow, there's like a bunch of those. So I'm going to open, oh, crap. What am I actually using here? I guess the 6 octave one. So this file is currently using Unix line endings, and I'm on Unix, so that works out. But if we were to swap this to Windows line endings and save the file, now, if I was to reopen that, we definitely see the line endings change there. Yeah. If I was to show piano now, is that actually still? Oh, it's still. Yeah. See, now there's issues with this because we can see. Hopefully you can see. There is. Where's my mouse? 0xDs on the end of this bad boy. That's because internally in Sublime, when it loads a file, no matter whether it's uh, a Windows file, a Unix file, or a macOS file, all of those three things have different line ending styles. Unix uses just line feeds, Windows uses carriage return and line feed, and I think macOS, or at least some versions of macOS, use just carriage return. So between the three, they've managed to hit every possible thing, one, the other, or both. Which one is right? Which one is wrong? Who is to say? I prefer the ones that Unix uses because there's few of them. But in any case, when Sublime loads a file, no matter what the line endings are, it normalizes it internally to always be new lines, and you refer to lines in the buffer, and it doesn't really matter. And then the line endings are used to save the file back to disk. So once this file is open in the buffer here, as far as Sublime is concerned, there's just this many lines. It doesn't matter whether they're Windows, Unix, or Mac OS. it has taken the appropriate line endings and used that to figure out where the lines begin and end, and then it saves what the actual file line type is so that it can use that when you save the file back to disk, which means that it's not possible to have a file with mixed line endings if you're going to edit it in Sublime, which personally I don't think it's a good idea anyway to have a file where some of the lines are terminated with just new lines, or because or line feeds if you're on like Mac OS, or carriage returns if you're on Mac OS. Might have said that wrong. A character turn line feed if you're on Windows. Having those mixed doesn't seem like a good idea to me, and Sublime doesn't support that. It'll load the file just fine, as far as I recall, but when you try to make a save, it will update all the lines in the file to the line ending. Now here, we're having an issue because this is a Windows formatted file, which means it's carriage return line feed, but I'm on Linux, and then when I insert stuff into the buffer, it doesn't know that it should do something specific with the carriage return characters here. And this is happening because the thing that loads the piano is loading the resource as a string and just sticking it in the buffer. It's not passing through Sublime's load functionality. Good night. Thanks for joining the stream. I do stream live every Tuesday, except for last Tuesday at this time spot. So any questions about Sublime, if I have an answer, I will give you one. And if I don't have an answer, I'll say, I don't know. Sometimes that happens, sometimes not. In any case, have a good evening, sir. Have a sublime day. Or sublime night, I guess, depending on your time zone. It's nighttime here. Now, the thing that loads a piano is something I can't quite remember. So, it's probably find piano, huh? No, it's get piano view. This is, okay, set piano layout is the thing we're actually looking at, which is this. So what's happening here, and we'll turn that off so we have a little bit more space here. When you call set piano layout, it calls sublime.loadResource and loads that resource in as a string, thusly. And then it uses append to stick those characters directly into the buffer. Now what that means is it's, if you will, circumventing Sublime's normal file loading. If you did a file load like we did from the sidebar, then it detects what the line endings are and it opens it as appropriate. But here we created the buffer. We told it that it knows that it's like a Unix thing because that's how I have my buffers set. And then as a result, when you load this string that has Windows line endings in and insert it in, it goes all doolally, if you will. And this is something I ran into with Override Audit when I was working on it. And I was unsure. I spent a lot of time trying to detect what the line endings were in the file and then set an appropriate mode in the view. No, sorry, it wasn't, excuse me, it wasn't Override Audit, it was HyperHelp. Loading help files does the exact same thing. It loads it as a resource so that it can get it as a string and do manipulations to it before it's added to the buffer and things of that nature. Or at least it did. I think it does it inside of the buffer now. But it turns out that that was very unreliable, trying to detect the line endings and set the appropriate thing. And then I did a little thing where I did, view package file and looked at exec because there's code in here. Whoops. Right. I forgot. That's not the way that I do that. That is responsible for capturing the data. I picked the wrong one. I want the other one. No. This one, excuse me. This is the thing that captures the data from the output thing and the program that's running and sticks it into the output panel. Oh, there's a limit on this now. Actually, I guess it's probably the thing that calls that. This one. Update annotations. Oh yeah, this is being modified slightly because this build of Sublime uses the new annotation API instead of phantoms to mark errors inline. But in any case, there was, and maybe there's not anymore, this bit here. Yeah, there we go. It's in a different place now than it was before. This used to be round about the place where it gets added to the buffer, but I guess they're doing it in a different place now. You get the data and replace all sequences of carriage return new line with new line, and then replace all instances of carriage returns with new lines. The purpose of this line right here is to normalize all of the output that a program is generating into the format that Sublime expects, which is new lines, or if you will, that's what it's using internally. So when you use its internal append methods and insert methods, it assumes a new line is what you're inserting. You mean to enter a new line. And this is something that it does on our behalf as package and plugin developers, because otherwise, anytime you ever wanted to append two lines to a buffer, line one, then line two, you would have to do something that detects whether you're on Windows and then do /r/n. Or if you're on old Mac OS, you just do /r. And if you're on Linux, you just do /n. Those are all, things you could do, but do you want it? Does every plugin author, every time they ever want to do this anywhere, want to do that? No, but since Sublime has its own normalized version of it, if you know that you only ever use /n, then everything just works. Same concept for why the packages that are just the contents of package resources always use the forward POSIX path separator, even on Windows where it's normally the other way, because then any plugin always can know that it specifies them in the exact same format. You never need to wonder what platform you're on. So this little bit of thing here says no matter what format, we want it to be new lines. So if you're running on Windows, then all of the carriage return new lines end up as just new lines in the buffer. And then also any just carriage returns end up as new lines. This one is for handling the case when we're on Mac OS, but the order of these has to be very specific, because if this one came first, then all the /r's would be /n's, and then everything would just be double spaced. This one would never be able to trigger because there'd never be a /r followed by a /n. So these have to happen in a very specific order. And since Sublime is still doing it that way, it really seems like we should be doing it that way as well. So I think if we did something like this, that's all we need to do to make this work. So if I was to close this now and then say show piano, now it's working as expected, which is exactly what we want to have happen. So I think what we're gonna do, boop, oh, I lost my window here. Hang on, is let's see, let's unpin that. Remove this pin, please. Okay, and let's go ahead and jump up here. I have two files here, huh? Oh, yeah, let's discard that one. And that used to be, oh, that used to be one line. Oh, okay. Well, in that case, we'll do this. That's probably the quote-unquote Pythonic way to do that. Okay. Fix line ending issues when showing the piano. Since we're using load resource and append to load and display the piano, we run into line ending issues if the package's resource isn't using the same line endings as the user has set for their platform. Here we normalize the input to use only /n the same way that the exec command does. Which resolves that issue. And we will go ahead and commit that bad boy. And anything else in this list? Oh, before I do that though, let me very quickly do this. What do we see in here? So someone just liking that one. Okay, that is okay. So we're going to jump back to the Discord. What else do we got in here that is perhaps easy to fix? Otherwise, we'll move on. Let's see. Potential setting for saying where the start octave is when using the keyboard to play. I think Keith might be working on that, so I'm going to leave that alone. Different colors for highlighting different inputs or channels. That's tricky. Add an annotation somewhere to the piano to show which channel is displaying. That's also semi-tricky. We're going to leave that. Setting for what channel to display and when the external source it's driving. Maybe channel 2. I think that's probably all we should do for that. So let's go ahead and push that up, shall we? Like so. We'll call it good on that one. There was one other thing that I had thought up here. Do, do, do. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Just I cannot find the. Well, maybe I need to do it this way. That's not it. That's not it. There was a Stack Overflow question. Dead air! And I got caught up looking at a thing. Not printing all columns. Switch my tabs to be 2 spaces instead of 4. Disable automatic indentation. We're going to go ahead and, yeah, let's do this. Let us click this button and check this out. Let's see. Oop, maximize that window. How to enable coloring text on Sublime. I want to color the text when writing in specific programming languages so I can copy paste to Word. I'm going to say if you want to copy something that is syntax highlighted and paste it to Word, you should be using something like Export HTML, which can do that. And Faceless User, the author of that, modified it to handle things earlier. Pasting from VS Code to Word keeps the formatting and colors for me. Pasting from VS Code to Word keeps the formatting and colors. You do have to make sure to paste with source formatting. Okay, but this is tagged as a Sublime thing, so I don't know that that's necessarily the thing. Anyway, export HTML. I'll swing back and perhaps look into that more. I would say try that right now, but I'd never like to provide an answer to Stack Overflow without trying what I'm going to say myself to make sure that it actually works. So I'm not going to say that. I have searched the topic for this question but couldn't find an answer. I'm currently working on a CSV file with around 10 columns, but when I print this file, the display doesn't show me all the columns. Is there any way of increasing the size of my display? Thank you for my answer. I don't understand that particular question. I want to display the columns instead of the 3 points. Sublime is almost certainly not doing this unless you have some package installed, would be my guess. It's not taking any liberties and assuming that if you're looking at comma separated data, you want to see the first columns and the last columns and not the middle columns. Sublime does not play that game. Sublime switch text 3 switched my tabs to be 2 spaces instead of 4. For some reason, my Sublime Text automatically switched my tabs to translate it to 2 spaces instead of 4 spaces, and I'm not sure where or why it started doing that. It's only on one file, and I only just realized, so it wasn't a recent development I can undo. Any idea of why it would do that or how to fix it? I already set the tab size to be 4 in user settings, so that's not it. Actually, that's not all you need to do, because if you were to look at preferences settings and look for, if I could type indentation, detect indentation defaults to true. When it's turned on, then when you open a file, Sublime examines the file to see what it thinks the indent should be, regardless of whether you set the tab size to 4 or 2 or 6 or 8, or whether you set translate tabs to spaces as true or false. If detect indentation is true and you have a file that looks like it's indented 4 spaces, then the indent will be set to 4 spaces. So you need to turn detect indentation off if you want your indentation to be exactly matching the one that appears in here. So that is something that we can swing back and go with later. Coding apps for a Samsung Chromebook. I was trying to download Sublime Text in Git, but it says that Chrome OS is not compatible. Sublime Text in Git. Well, I use Sublime Text and Sublime Merge on my Chromebook. It's not a Samsung, it's an Asus, but the magic is it needs to be running Linux. If your Chromebook is compatible, you can install Play Store. If your Chromebook is not compatible, you can download the Play Store APK. Um, yeah, that is not a correct answer because there's not Android version of Sublime. So installing the Play Store and installing an Android version of the application is not likely to work for you. Or if you find a Sublime Text 3 Android thing somewhere, it's not official and that's scary. Disabling automatic indentation in Go files. Is there a way to force Sublime Text 3 to disable auto indentation when working with Go files? I have tried to use auto indent false, detect indentation false, font size 14, but it does not stick. Every time I open a new Go file and hit tab, it reverts back to 4 spaces. Another reason why this could happen is if you have Go specific syntax settings set. If you had a file open and you used preferences settings syntax specific. I, for example, have syntax specific Python settings that set the rulers to 79 and 80, which trumps the ones that exist in my standard settings. So regardless of what my normal preferences say in Python, I get 2 of these. But in a regular plain text file, I only get 1. And if I told this was the syntax to be Python, it immediately jumps to 2. So if you had syntax specific settings for Go, then that would possibly be a reason for that. And if you're using a Go related package or plugin, then it could be applying its own rules for you on your behalf and you might need to override them. Or as this user mentions, it's entirely possible that if you're using a Go plugin, it thinks it knows better than you about how things should be formatted. That's not strictly true of just Go. That could be any package realistic or any language realistically. If you're using something that is for working with files of a particular language and it had some sort of formatter in it. For example, I think spaces are preferred over tabs in Python for reasons. I don't know why I think that. I personally choose spaces over tabs just because I want the file to look. When I make something, I want it to look the way that I wanted it to look when I wrote it. And if I use tabs, then that varies wildly. Um, that's just me. If you like to use tabs, that's perfectly fine. We have the setting to allow us to do that. So the same thing could be that if there was something for Python that wanted to enforce that you were using spaces instead of tabs, it's entirely within its purview to do something like that. So that's definitely something that you should look at there. Activate Conda in Sublime REPL. Well, I do not use Sublime REPL. I recommend if you want to do something REPL-like to use Terminus because it's just a lot easier to set up and it's more actively developed. In fact, as I have pointed out a couple of times in a couple of different places, a few builds ago, not in the Sublime Text 4 build series, but in the Sublime Text 3 build series, um, the authors of Sublime made some modifications. In fact, to something that I mentioned just earlier, specifically to the idea that when you say view package file or similar, if I could type, all of the packages resources in Sublime are always represented as forward slashes. Hello, Ashwin. Welcome to the stream. We're just doing random stuff. I was just pointing out that here in the package resource list, and this is also the topic of a video that I did like last week or the week before or something. I can't remember. I guess it was last week's plugin 101. Package resources, regardless of platform, are always represented with POSIX path separators, that is the forward slash, even on Windows where backslash is the path separator of choice. So whether you're on Windows, macOS, or Linux, the resource spec is always the forward slash here, which is nice because it means that when you're doing a key binding or in a plugin or otherwise accessing a resource, it'll always do what you want. If you use the forward slash, you don't have to test what platform you're on and then use other path separators, right? Um, it turns out I can't remember exactly what build this was, but if you go to the Sublime forum and search for things that say like Sublime REPL is broken in the latest build of Sublime, tons and tons of people flocked to the forum because they were users of the Sublime REPL package to do their plugin develop or Python development, sorry, not plugin development, and they use that to be able to run their Python code in the REPL environment. And they found that once they upgraded to whatever the latest version of Sublime was at that point, the key binding for executing Python in REPL no longer worked, would just do nothing. And it was like a really confusing, like, what the hell is going on here? It used to work. What's going on? And the developers of Sublime didn't, as far as they could tell, do anything that would cause any sort of weird regression in plugins. They go out of their way to make sure when they enhance things that they do it in a way where existing plugins don't break, right? That's why in the newer builds of Sublime, when we're going to Python 3.8, there's two plugin hosts so that every plugin that's currently out there can continue to run in the old one so they don't do anything bad to the ecosystem. But still, Sublime REPL wouldn't work. And eventually, enough people asked in the forum and on Stack Overflow that we were able to determine that it seemed to only be happening to people on Windows, because someone would pop in and say, "Hey, Sublime REPL doesn't work," and then I'd be on my Linux box like I am right now and try to do it, and it would work just fine. And then I tried it on Mac OS, and it worked just fine. And then, someone said, "Hey, it's not working on Windows." So on that blue laptop back there, which runs Windows 10, I installed it there and it failed. So I did some deep dives into the code of Sublime REPL and determined that the reason it was failing is it was not respecting the fact that all package resources have forward slashes in it. So it was coming up with file names for resources inside of the packages folder by mixing the Windows path separator with the package path separator, which used to work absolutely fine in older versions of Sublime. But it turns out in this new build, one of the things that the developers did to make Sublime faster was some optimizations to the file catalog to help it keep track of information better, which required that it not be able to say, now, for example, if I said sublime.load resource and I said packages user preferences.sublime setting, right? This works and I get the string. And if I did this instead, it uh, it doesn't work now. It used to work previously. There was an issue with the API that they were using. And this might actually be broken specifically because it's in Python 3.8, actually. But the Sublime REPL code was doing something like this, and it was causing resource not found errors, and as a result, key bindings didn't work. And the developers had no choice but to roll that back in the next build that came out to stop that from happening, so that things would actually work. Um, they may have unrolled that back now. I'm not sure, or I may be doing it quite. It's been a while since that was the thing. But what that taught me, I better put that back before I forget and do something stupid later, was that uh, Sublime REPL hasn't been actively maintained in like 4 years. And normally that's not that much of an issue because once the package reaches some level of maturity and it has all the features that you need in it, it doesn't necessarily require more updates. So there are some packages that people think are abandoned, and realistically, the author just decided it's done. You know, what's going to change about something that's going to require a fix here? And in this case, there's a bug in Sublime REPL that actually blocked an upgrade in Sublime, and the developers did nothing, and there was no choice but to downgrade Sublime, which is why I don't necessarily recommend a Sublime REPL. There's probably an easier way to do it in Terminus instead. I also wasn't too much of a fan of its configuration method, which probably made a lot of sense way back when it was originally written, but a lot of things have changed since then. Control click for multi-select is something that I've been going back and forth with this guy about a little bit. Control click to multi-select doesn't work for this person on Windows 10 and Sublime 3.2. That really seems like it should work. I haven't really looked into that yet. I asked him that, and life intruded. What can we say? Win error 2. This one is 100%. Your Python's not in the path, dude. No code output in Sublime Text 3 C++ have tried the solution in previous posts. Do I need to make any changes to this? This is another one that I'm helping someone with. He says that he's using this particular build system and he's definitely using the run variant, but he's not seeing any output. He's just saying finished in zero point 0.2 seconds or something. And the run variant very clearly compiles to an output and then runs it, or looks like it tries to run it. So it's either generating an error or it's running the program. So if there's no output being generated, I'm suspicious that the code doesn't actually print anything, but we're waiting for him to come back on that. In VS Code, can I autocomplete function parameters for PHP? I don't know, probably. I'm not entirely sure why that's tagged. Don't know anything about Haskell. No, that one I didn't even see. Sublime Text doesn't compile with Anaconda. No, you're right, it's C++, but uh, this looks like an issue with it can't find the Anaconda thing. Update your path, dude. I may have even said something like that down here. This is something that I'm a little confused by. When I was in college, many years ago, and I was in the computer systems uh, technology course, I guess it was CST. Uh, we had to take a lot of courses about a lot of things, like accounting and marketing, which both made me very sad because there's no accounting for marketing. I'm not a fan of either of those things, but I guess if you're going to be in the software development world, you need to know a little bit about business. Yeah, made sense. In the first year, we had to do a course that taught us how to use DOS because, it was an old-timey thing, and then Windows. And I'm pretty sure we might have been on Windows 3.1 at that point, just to date myself, because one of the things we like to do to, you know, tease people in the lab was get in before them and change the color scheme on their assigned workstation to hot dog stand, which is all garish reds and yellows to look like mustard and ketchup. It's something that was built into Windows at the time. So whatever version of Windows had that as a built-in color scheme, that's the one we were using. And we learned all of the ins and outs of how to use DOS, what the path is, how to use Windows, and things of that nature before we ever got to do anything like install. Uh, I think we were using Turbo Pascal at the time in the first year, and then we jumped to C in the second year. It seems weird to me that there's so many questions from people that don't know how to use the path or don't know that they should save their files before they try to run them in an external process. Because it seems like that's something that is you should be being taught by whatever course you're using, in school or like an online tutorial or something. It That's just sort of a weird divide for me. Um, I'm gonna find the thing I was looking for eventually here. My JS file doesn't work, gets saved as a text file. I think that's somebody that also cross-posted to the forum. Strings are not working. It throws an error when using string. Closed. Bash, Java C, command not found, Sublime Text 3. I'm going to bet that the reason for that is you need to have the path updated. Here's another example. I downloaded the JDK on the machine, but somehow the text editor couldn't find Java C, perhaps also Java. I wonder what happens with my Java build system. Yeah, this is the list of places where it's looking. So unless there's a Java C executable in one of those few places, that is not going to work. I think when you set up Java on Linux, at least all the times that I've done it, and I use Linux distributions that require you to do it manually, you have to add it to your path yourself. And even if it did manually do it, you have to remember to quit and restart Sublime. And the way that the path is inherited is the same as all environment variables, which is it's inherited from the parent process that originally started it. So here, for example, I'm using XFCE, and when I click this button up here, I'm running something in the panel, and it's the thing that is starting Sublime Text, which means that whatever environment the Windows system had at the time when it started is the environment that gets passed to this. So even if I change the path right now, if I click this, Sublime's not going to see that path because it inherited the path from something that doesn't know that the path changed without logging out and in again. Although in some windowing systems, you can flip a setting to say that you want to run this in a terminal or open a terminal. That usually means that it's opening like a bash terminal behind the scenes and then launching from there to make sure that the thing gets updated, the environment. How to use a linter from a virtual environment? I'm not even entirely sure how to use a linter. Okay, live collaboration with another person. Text editor downgraded Python, broke Sublime, and VS Code. Here we go. Is it possible in Sublime to make a project have a name with tokens in it where the tokens would be parts of the path? I'm trying to produce a name like the following. The branch would be the name of the folder I added to the project, and the product would be the name of the folder one level up from this. So the path would look like this. Here's an example of what I think the project file would look like if these tokens existed. So I think the idea is if you added those paths, the name of the first one would be product one and then branch in brackets, and that one would be product two branch. The ultimate answer to this is Sublime doesn't do that out of the box. This is something that we could theoretically write a plugin for, but it's a little unclear about what he actually wants it to do because this is how he wants the project to look, but it's a little unclear what he wanted the actual names to look like. This is also one of those things that would work better in Sublime 4 than Sublime 3 because you can detect when a project is being loaded and then manipulate its contents at that point. Otherwise, you would have to run a command manually when you open the thing. So I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, I have the same problem, Ashwin. It almost seems like based on this, he wants this to be that and that to be that, but it's a little unclear. It's also unclear under what circumstances this should happen. Because I would imagine, why do these both have the same thing? Does he want them to always be the same thing? Because you could just add something to your project like name specification and then not add it in here and have a plugin cram these in when it starts. The fact that they're in here specifically makes it seem like each one should be customizable separately. And then you run into the problem, as I mentioned in the comments on this thing. If you replace the name, it's easy to expand the variables in here, but in that case, the name field no longer has variables, so it's nothing you could do again if it matters. I mean, I imagine if you change the path, you'd have to go back and change the name. So one thing you would have to do is store these in some other metadata elsewhere so that you could get it back later if you needed to. Um, I was thinking of fiddling with that a little bit, but I think we need them to actually do a little bit more. What do we want to do? How to add a timeout on Windows for a Sublime build system for C++. That seems more like a Windows. I believe the idea here is we want to start this compile, but if it takes more than 10 seconds, we want to kill the thing. Um, hmm. That might actually be fairly easy with a custom target. Let's see. We got time. It's only 9:43. Let's see what happens. Let's go ahead and close that and bang that up. Boop, boop. And okay, so what do we want to do here? We want a new target, right? So let's say from default.exec import exec command, and then timeout exec command is that. It needs to be a window command. Thank you, no. Shift state fail, and we're going to say ** kwrgs. Oops. We don't want any of that business, and we want to say super.run that. And I think that's the minimum required for that. Let's go ahead and just squinch that down and say we want this to be, actually, shoot. Echo start and sleep 20 and echo done, right? Timeout test, and then we can go to the tools menu and change the build system to timeout test. So when we run the build, didn't like that, huh? Oh, I guess maybe I should make it valid, Jason. What do you say? Boop, boop, and then we wait a little bit, and I'll size that down. We don't need that panel to be quite that tall for this operation. Perhaps 20 seconds was a bit too long for this, huh? Maybe I should have set that to be a little more circumspect. I'll fix it. All right, it took exactly 20 seconds. Right, so our build works. And if we said the target was timeout, whoops, exec, and we want to say cancel is, well, we'll do it this way. Kill true, so we can cancel this thing when we're done. The build should still work, theoretically, unless I screwed something up. What did I do wrong? It really seems like it should be doing something. Does it go like this? Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. Of all the things that would slow me down, I wouldn't have thought that that would be the business. All right, then. Two to the 27th is the output limit. I'm glad that it's being circumspect about things. Yeah. That really seems. Oh, derp. Derpy derperson. That's not supposed to be a window command. It's supposed to be an exec command. Fool. Okay, there we go. That's embarrassing. There we go. So we have that doing something, right? What might we do? Oh, I guess I probably shouldn't have done that because we're probably going to need to look at that again. We know how to kill this, right? We need to do this if we want to actually kill a running process, which causes it to be canceled. We wouldn't be able to specify that it was a timeout type thing. One thing we want to add in here is timeout. Let's say 4 seconds. It's 4 seconds. Just because that's a little bit nicer. So here we need to say timeout equals kwrgs.pop timeout and 0. And then we can specifically do something if there is a timeout. Never under any circumstances pass the exec command any arguments that aren't in this list right here, and path and shell, which for some reason are caught with kwargs instead of with path and shell. I guess because they could theoretically be in any order, if I had to guess. I guess we would say if timeout, then we're going to need a little bit of extra action here. What we're going to want to do is call set timeout on this with some number of seconds. So we're going to say sublime.set timeout with a callback. And timeout is going to be, if I remember correctly, in milliseconds. So we need to multiply the timeout value there by 1,000 to make sure that it ends up correct. This callback is going to be responsible for, let's say, dev timeout self, like so. And then we could do that thing that we just saw in the exec, which is if self.proc.kill, like this. And then the callback is just going to be self.timeout, like this. So the way this is set up, the build should take 10 seconds, but we should get it automatically canceling itself after 4, right? In theory. Thus, we don't actually want it to say canceled, though. We want it to say timed out. So maybe skip that one. That one. Skip that. Skip that. That one should be self dot timeout, and this one timeout build. Okay, like so. Because we're going to need a little bit of extra action here. If we search for, turn that off. Excuse me. This, if proc killed right canceled in on finished. Crap. I guess we got to do a bunch of extra stuff here, don't we? And we're currently in the wrong version of Sublime to be able to share this on Stack Overflow, but that's okay. So I think what we would do is self.write /n timeout exceeded %f, and then go self.timeout. So now when we do it, it should say something like timeout exceeded 4 seconds. Then we might actually do a little something like that. And we might want to say 0.1f. So we see a little bit of this action happening. And there you go. Now, the only issue we have with this per se is that what happens if this is the case? Because if it actually finishes, this is probably maybe not cool. No, I guess that's not okay. Right. we need to know that it's actually finished. So I guess in order to do that, we might say def on finished self proc, say self dot build complete equals true, and then super dot on finished with proc to let it do what it would normally do. We're going to take that and that. Always pretend that the build isn't complete. This says if the build is complete, if self proc and not self dot build complete. So now if we do it, when the build finishes after that many seconds, we shouldn't see it say that it canceled this thing, which is exactly what we want. But if we flip this back the other way, so that's 10 and that's 4, then when we do it, we should in fact see it doing that. Cool. And if we did that and canceled the build, we should see it canceled, and then we don't see anything because unfinished canceled the build. So this is the plugin that would totally help that guy do what he wants to do, assuming that you were on Sublime Text 4, because I don't think it's as easy to do this in Sublime Text 3. We could always click that button to see, I suppose. I happen to have a copy of that laying around. Boop, 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 and exec.py and unfinished. No, the other one. Crap, I do that every time. Sublime set timeout self.finish. Right. Oh, is that not what the other thing was doing? Yeah, sorry. It's just called finish, right? Yeah. It's a little bit different now than it was before. You need to call self.append string in that one instead. So if we were doing this here, I imagine, ooh, boy, that's unhappy. Data URI tool is not a happy camper in this version. This is probably going to be super unhappy. Timeout exec command object has no attribute right. You're right, it totally doesn't. You're right. Okay, let's go ahead and I'm gonna copy that and paste it here. Timeout exec old. So that there's two versions of this thing. Because this needs to be finish self-proc now instead of that. And this needs to be self.append string instead of that. We don't want that in there. I think that is just what we want. We're appending, I guess, a line at a time because nothing else seems to do it. Well, we'll see what happens. And after 4 seconds, if the plugin explodes. Oh, did I do something stupid there? Oh, whoops. Self. There we go. It needs to know what thing was actually running. Nice to see that this actually did some stuff. Timeout exceeded. And do we see the build cancel? No, we don't, huh? Oh, I guess because our killing it actually killed it. So that part might not actually be needed here. That's interesting. I'm going to comment this part out just to see. Clearly, I'll do a little bit more work on this before I post it as an answer for that guy. Still okay? Uh-huh. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I guess if we're going to do it that way, we also don't need this. We also don't need this, right? So there we go. And 4, and then we wait for a few more seconds, and we're probably not going to see anything there. If we time out the build, we just ask it to kill itself, which is interesting the way that that works. If this calls kill, it needs to say, oh, in this version, it's specifically doing that. So we should probably say self.proc equals none. Basically, we're implementing what the cancel would actually do, which is kill the thing, set it to be none, and then say that it was canceled. Only here we're saying the timeout exceeded instead. So in this version, it's actually a lot cleaner. So that's nice. We don't need this, and we don't need any of this. All things told, it's a pretty handy little thing. And the answer to this guy's question is, how do I set a timeout? You do this, and then you modify your build to use timeout exec and cancel and timeout with a timeout seconds. So that's pretty swank, all things told. I think that fan in that computer is going to drive me silently crazy. For some reason, my coffee cup smells like tea. Tastes like coffee, though. That's a little bit of a weirdness. I'm going to go ahead and quit out of that, and we should totally be seeing that stuff here. This one is for Sublime Text 3.2. This one is for Sublime Text 4. And away we go. And yeah, so I think that is... I'll give an answer to this guy. Asked April 23rd. Wow, that was 5 days ago. I could have swore that that was more recent. That just goes to show that my time is really being filled up with a lot of other stuff extraneously in the background. But yeah. So I think we're going to go ahead and call the stream there. That was not too shabby. We finished up some nice Sublime Text action. We did some piano work, possibly fixed a bug, listened to Jeopardy, went through some Stack Overflow questions, answered a question for a guy, determined that at least 4 people need to update the path, which is something that I kind of have a video for how to update the path, but I didn't want to tackle it because what version of Windows you're on is different, and what version of Linux you're using, what shell you're using, what version of macOS you're using. It's a slightly different thing that you have to do. You really just need to Google how to do it, and once you do it once, you know how to do it everywhere else. But yeah, so there we have that. And again, apologies for there not being a stream last week. Life intrudes sometimes, but what can we do? But we got a stream in tonight. We got some cool action done, and it is time to say au revoir, if you will, until next time. So remember, subscribe to the channel, like the video. If you like the more focused videos, link down in the description to my other channel where we are doing a weekly video drop on Mondays at 9 a.m., alternating between regular Sublime Text tutorials and Plugin 101. And Plugin 101 is coming up in the next iteration this coming Monday, which I believe is Tools of the Trade, learning about how to open the console, execute commands, trace problems, things of that nature, if I remember correctly. But, you know, it's late, so that may or may not be the case. Until that next video, and live stream, I guess, this is OdatNurd asking you to please have a sublime day.